The call came through at 4:17 on a Tuesday morning. I remember checking my phone twice because the number looked wrong. Too many digits, like someone had fat-fingered the keypad. But it was the Chicago field office, and they don't call at that hour unless something's gone sideways. "We need you on a plane," Deputy Director Walsh said. No greeting, no small talk. "Xavier Robertson's dead." I sat up in bed, sheets tangling around my legs. Robertson was one of mine, had been for 3 years. Former numbers man for the Bratva. Turned state's evidence after they tried to burn him alive in his own warehouse. We'd moved him 4 times, changed his name twice. Guy was so paranoid he'd check under his car every morning, even though we swept it nightly. "How?" I asked, already pulling on yesterday's pants. "That's what you're gonna tell us." The flight from DC to Chicago gave me time to review Robertson's file. 48 years old, born in Moscow, came over in the 90s when the Soviet Union fell apart. Started keeping books for the Russian mob in Brighton Beach, worked his way up to managing their entire Midwest operation. Smart guy. Too smart, really. That's what got him in trouble. Started skimming, thinking he could outsmart men who'd survived Stalin's gulags. I'd handled Robertson's placement personally, set him up in a 2-story brownstone on the north side. Nice, quiet neighborhood full of young families and old-timers who minded their own business. He worked at a hardware store, kept to himself, went by the name Gary Collins. Boring life, but that was the point. Boring keeps you breathing. The safe house looked normal from the outside. No crime scene tape, no uniformed cops. Just 2 unmarked sedans and a coroner's van backed into the driveway. That told me plenty. They were keeping this quiet. Inside, the place smelled like copper pennies and that particular stillness that comes after violence. Robertson, I couldn't think of him as Collins, not anymore, was in the living room. They'd left him where he fell, waiting for me to see it firsthand. The ligature marks caught my eye immediately. Deep grooves around his neck, but something was off about them. I crouched down, tilted my head to catch the light from the window. The marks seemed to shift, like they had depth that changed depending on the angle. Looked like rope burns from one direction, wire cuts from another. "Never seen anything like it," said Detective Chen, the lead from Chicago PD. Young guy, maybe 30, trying to grow a mustache that wasn't cooperating. Me says it's some kind of specialized garrote, but she's never seen marks pattern out like that. I'd been doing this for 15 years, protecting witnesses, investigating when protection failed. Started right out of the Marines, thought I'd seen every way the mob could kill a person. But this was different. Too clean, too precise. The Bratva liked to send messages with their kills. They'd leave you in pieces, make sure whoever found you knew exactly why you died. This was surgical, almost respectful. "Any sign of forced entry?" I asked. "Nothing. Locks intact, windows secure. Security system never triggered." Robertson had trusted someone. After 3 years of checking under cars and jumping at shadows, he'd opened his door to his killer. I spent 2 days in Chicago, interviewing neighbors, reviewing security footage, walking through Robertson's last hours. The trail was cold before I started. Whoever did this was a professional, but not mob. The syndicates have signatures, cultural markers in their violence. Russians like hammers and blowtorches. Italians prefer bullets to the head. Japanese make it look like suicide. This didn't match any playbook I knew. 3 weeks later, I was staring at crime scene photos from Seattle. Sawyer Montgomery, former Yakuza lieutenant, found dead in his apartment near Pike Place Market. Same ligature marks, same precision, same complete lack of evidence. Montgomery had been one of our success stories. Testified against the Inagua Kai family, helped us shut down their West Coast trafficking operation. In protection, he'd become Samuel Mason, worked at a dojo teaching kids karate. Kept his head down, followed every rule we gave him. Didn't matter. I flew to Seattle, walked through another scene that told me nothing except that I was failing at my job. Montgomery's apartment was neat as a pin. Bed made with military corners, shoes lined up by the door, kitchen knives arranged by size. The kind of order that comes from years of discipline. He'd fought, though. Defensive wounds on his hands, furniture knocked askew, but he'd still lost. The Seattle detective, a woman named Reeves with 20 years on the job, pulled me aside. "You thinking what I'm thinking? That we've got a problem bigger than 2 dead witnesses?" She nodded. "Got a call from Miami this morning. They've got a body down there, similar circumstances. Some ex-mob guy in witness protection. Pedro Miles." I knew before she said the name. 250 pounds of Brooklyn attitude stuffed into a tracksuit, even after we told him to dress down. former underboss for the Lucchese family, flipped after they tried to clip him over a territory dispute. We'd stashed him in a Miami suburb, figured the retirees and beach bums would provide good cover. The Miami scene was 3 days old by the time I got there. Same marks, same method, same ghost of a killer who came and went without leaving a trace. But Miles had managed something the others hadn't. He'd scratched his attacker. The ME pulled skin cells from under his nails, sent them for DNA analysis. While we waited for results, I sat in my hotel room with 3 murder files spread across the bed, 3 different crime families, 3 different cities, 3 men with nothing in common except they'd all testified against their former employers and trusted the federal government to keep them safe. The DNA came back unmatched. No hits in any database, which meant our killer had never been arrested, never served in the military, never submitted to a background check. A ghost hunting ghosts. That's when the calls started coming in from my contacts in organized crime. The Bratva thought the Yakuza were cleaning house. The Yakuza suspected the Italians of breaking the old codes. The Italians blamed the Russians for starting a war. 60 years of uneasy peace between the families built on mutual understanding and shared enemies, crumbling because someone was killing witnesses with methods that didn't match any known signature. I flew back to DC and called an emergency meeting with the Marshal Service brass. Laid out what I knew, which wasn't much, and what I suspected, which was worse. Someone's targeting the witness protection program itself, I told them. This isn't about revenge or sending messages, it's about destroying the system. Deputy Director Walsh, a man who'd survived 3 administrations and never raised his voice, slammed his hand on the conference table. How many witnesses do we have in play? Active protection? About 3,000 nationwide. And how many can we move on short notice? I did the math in my head, factored in resources, safe houses, personnel. Maybe 10%, if we're lucky. The room went quiet. We all understood what that meant. Someone out there had declared war on the entire witness protection system, and we were playing catch-up with 3,000 lives hanging in the balance. They sent Janet Young to me on a Thursday morning. I remember because I'd been living on conference room coffee for 3 days straight, and the taste had gone from bad to something that made me wonder if the machine was trying to kill me before our mystery assassin could. Eric Sims. She stood in the doorway of my borrowed office, all 5 feet 6 inches of her wrapped in a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. Wire-rimmed glasses caught the fluorescent lights. I'm Janet Young, Intelligence Analysis Division. Deputy Director Walsh said you needed help with pattern recognition. I looked up from the mess of files covering every flat surface. Crime scene photos, witness statements, toxicology reports. 3 dead men reduced to paper and speculation. You the one who caught that sleeper cell in Detroit last year? Among other things. She stepped inside without invitation, set a leather portfolio on the only clear corner of my desk. Her movements were precise, economical, no wasted energy. I've reviewed the preliminary reports, may I? She gestured at the wall where I'd tacked up everything. Photos, timelines, maps with red string connecting cities like some conspiracy theorist's fever dream. I waved her ahead, went back to staring at Robertson's autopsy photos. Those ligature marks still bothered me, different from every angle, like they changed based on how you looked at them. Janet studied my work for maybe 10 minutes. Didn't say a word, just tilted her head occasionally, adjusted her glasses twice. When she finally spoke, her voice had that clinical detachment I'd heard from surgeons and bomb techs. People who dealt with horror by turning it into puzzles. You're thinking about this wrong. She pulled down one of my timeline sheets, grabbed a marker from my desk. You're looking for a person, a killer with a method. But what if we're dealing with something more systematic? Systematic how? She started writing, her handwriting small and precise. Professional elimination protocol, not just murder, intelligence harvesting. Look at your victims. Robertson knew every money trail from Moscow to Chicago. Montgomery understood Yakuza hierarchy and operational security. Miles had 30 years of Italian family politics in his head. I sat forward, coffee forgotten. You're saying someone's collecting their knowledge? More than collecting. She turned, and for the first time I noticed her eyes behind those glasses. Dark, almost black, with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Extracting, processing, cataloging, building a comprehensive database of criminal operations using the most reliable sources available, the men who lived it. The idea was crazy. Also made more sense than anything I'd come up with in 3 weeks. I rubbed my face, felt 3 days of stubble. Jesus, that's not just killing witnesses. That's weaponizing the witness protection program itself. She set down the marker, returned to studying my wall. Every person you protect represents years of insider knowledge, decades of accumulated intelligence about criminal organizations, all in one convenient government-verified package. Over the next 2 weeks, Janet became my shadow, always there when I needed her, with exactly the right report or analysis. She'd appear at my office door at 7 in the morning with coffee that actually tasted like coffee and some connection I'd missed. Stayed until midnight, sometimes later, building databases and running algorithms I didn't understand. "How'd you know to pull the Miami Port Authority records?" I asked one night. We were going through Miles's final days, trying to find how the killer had found him. She didn't look up from her laptop. Pattern analysis. Miles was old school, liked to eat at the same restaurants his father did. Cross-referenced Italian family holdings from the 60s with current businesses. The Port Authority owned 3 buildings on his regular route. I shook my head. That's brilliant. It's just data. But I caught the hint of a smile. You want brilliant. Look at how our killer bypassed your security protocols. Every safe house has tells if you know the system well enough. She was right about that too. Started showing me vulnerabilities I'd never considered. How utility bills created patterns. How our rotation schedules left gaps. How the very procedures meant to protect witnesses could be reverse-engineered to find them. "We need to change everything," I said after she demolished 6 different security protocols in an hour. "Whole systems compromised." "Not yet." She closed her laptop, took off her glasses to clean them. Without them, she looked younger, softer. "But it will be if we don't stop this. How many active witnesses do you have in high-risk categories?" "Classified. Eric." She put her glasses back on, and the softness vanished. "I can't help you protect them if you don't trust me." Trust. Funny thing about trust in my line of work. You learn not to give it easily, but when someone's helping you save lives, when they're the only one making sense of the chaos, yeah, you trust. I started sharing more. Not everything. I wasn't that stupid, but enough. Witness categories, security protocols, general locations for our most vulnerable protectees. Then Atticus Lewis died. The call came at 2 in the morning. Miami field office. Another one down, same impossible signature. I threw on clothes, called Janet from the car. "Young hacker?" she asked before I could speak. "Early 20s, probably testified against cryptocurrency laundering operations." "How did you—" "Pattern progression. They've harvested muscle, money, and hierarchy. Digital infrastructure was the logical next target. I'll meet you at the airport." Atticus Lewis had been 26 years old. Looked maybe 17 in his tech company hoodies and thick glasses. Kid had stumbled into a money laundering scheme while doing freelance coding. Thought he was building a gaming platform. Turned state's evidence when he realized he'd helped wash $300 million in cartel money. His apartment still smelled like energy drinks and pizza when I arrived. Miami heat made everything worse. Turned the copper penny smell of blood into something thick enough to taste. Atticus sat at his desk, head tilted at that unnatural angle I'd started seeing in my sleep. But this time, something was different. "Look at this." Janet appeared beside me, careful not to disturb the scene. She pointed at his monitors, 3 of them, all displaying different screens full of code. He was working when it happened. Kid was always working, probably didn't even hear. "No." She leaned closer, studying the screens. "This isn't his code. Look at the syntax, the structure. Someone made him write this before he died, made him document his entire system." I looked closer. Meant nothing to me. Might as well have been hieroglyphics. But Janet understood. I watched her face change as she read, saw something like admiration flash across her features. "This is elegant," she murmured. "Brutal, but elegant. They didn't just kill him. They downloaded him. Every backdoor he'd built, every vulnerability he'd found, every piece of digital architecture he'd created for the cartels. It's all here. Can we trace it? Find where this information went?" She straightened, and that clinical mask slipped back into place. "I'll need his hard drives, access to his cloud accounts. But yes, possibly, if we're lucky." We weren't lucky. 3 days later, while I was still in Miami trying to make sense of Atticus's digital ghost, Colin Nelson died in Phoenix. Colin had been an enforcer for the Jersey mob, 6 feet 3 inches of scarred muscle who'd found religion in prison and turned state's evidence out of what he called spiritual obligation. Guy could break your neck 6 different ways, but spent his protected life teaching youth boxing and reading philosophy. They found him in his garage gym at 5 in the morning. Same signature marks, same impossible angle. But the scene, Christ, the scene was like nothing I'd ever processed. Performance art, Janet said. We'd flown straight from Miami, hadn't even stopped at hotels. She walked the perimeter of Colin's gym, cataloging details while local cops tried not to contaminate evidence. Look at the positioning, the equipment arrangement. This isn't just murder. She was right. Colin's body had been arranged in a combat stance. Around him, every piece of gym equipment had been precisely placed to demonstrate different fighting techniques. On the mirrors, someone had written, in Colin's blood, detailed breakdowns of nerve strikes, pressure points, tactical approaches. It's a fucking manual, I said. They turned him into an instruction book. More than that. Janet crouched beside a weight bench where photos had been arranged. Pictures of Colin from his enforcer days, each annotated with technical observations about stance, approach, psychological tactics. They extracted 40 years of violence expertise, documented every skill he'd developed, every technique he'd perfected, the muscle memory of murder, preserved for study. I had to step outside. The Phoenix heat hit like a sledgehammer, but at least it didn't smell like blood and gym chalk. Janet followed, found me leaning against somebody's decorative cactus garden. This is escalating, she said. Clinical voice, like we were discussing weather patterns instead of the systematic execution of people I'd sworn to protect. The killer's not just eliminating witnesses anymore. They're building something. Building what? A comprehensive database of criminal intelligence. Think about it. They now have financial systems from Robertson, organizational hierarchy from Montgomery, territorial politics from Miles, digital infrastructure from Lewis, and tactical operations from Nelson. Combined, that's a complete blueprint for understanding and predicting organized crime behavior. My phone buzzed. Text from Walsh asking for an update. I ignored it, studied Janet instead. How do you see patterns like that? Most people would just see dead bodies. She adjusted her glasses. A gesture I'd learned meant she was choosing her words carefully. I've spent my career analyzing intelligence failures, looking for the patterns everyone else missed. This killer, they think like I do. See data where others see chaos. That's why Walsh sent you to me. Partly. She turned back toward the house. Also because I have clearance levels you don't. Access to databases that might show us how the killer's getting federal information. Right. The impossible access. Each victim found despite security protocols that should have been unbreachable. Safe houses that existed only in classified systems. Identities buried under layers of digital protection. We have a mole, I said, stating the obvious, but sometimes you need to hear the words out loud. Almost certainly, someone with high-level access to witness protection files. She pulled out her phone, started typing. I'll run correlation analyses tonight, see if any access patterns match our timeline. Janet, I caught her arm as she turned to go. Thank you. I mean it. I'd be nowhere without your help. She looked at my hand on her arm, then up at me. For just a second, that clinical mask slipped again. We're going to stop this, Eric, I promise. I believed her. God help me. I believed her. That night, back in my hotel room, I spread out files on the bed and tried to see what Janet saw. 5 dead witnesses, each killed with surgical precision, their lifetime of criminal knowledge extracted and documented. A killer who moved like smoke through federal security systems. My phone rang. Janet, I found something, she said without preamble. Access logs show irregularities. Someone's been using emergency override codes to access witness files. Very subtle, very careful, but there's a pattern. Can you trace it? Working on it. But Eric, she paused, and I heard something in her voice I couldn't identify. I need more access. Full witness database, locations, security protocols, transport schedules. Without complete data, I can't predict who's next. I stood at my hotel window, looking out at Phoenix sprawling under sodium lights. Somewhere out there, 3,000 people lived under federal protection. New names, new lives, all trusting us to keep them safe. Eric? Janet's voice pulled me back. I know it's a lot to ask, but we're running out of time. She was right. Every day we delayed was another day the killer had to hunt, another chance for someone under my protection to die. I thought about Robertson's paranoia, checking under his car every morning, Montgomery's precise apartment, everything in its place, Miles scratching at his attacker, trying to leave us clues, Atticus at his desk, forced to betray every digital secret he'd kept. Colin turned into a textbook of violence. All right, I said. Full access. But Janet, this stays between us. If Walsh knew I was sharing this level of classification, he won't hear it from me. I could hear her typing already. Send me everything. Witness locations, security protocols, transport schedules, safe house networks, all of it. I spent the next 3 hours compiling files, encryption protocols that would make the NSA proud, secure channels that cost more than most people's houses. Every piece of information that could help Janet predict the killer's next move, help her find the pattern that would save lives. I hit send at 4 a.m, sat back in my hotel chair, exhausted beyond measure. 5 witnesses dead on my watch. But now I had help. Now I had someone brilliant enough to see what I'd missed. Janet Young was going to help me save the rest. I actually believed that, sitting in that Phoenix hotel room with 5 dead men's files scattered around me like accusations. Trust comes hard in my line of work, but when someone proves themselves, when they show up with answers when all you have is questions, yeah, you trust. You share witness locations and security protocols. You hand over the keys to the kingdom because the alternative is more bodies, more failure, more good people dying because you couldn't protect them. I closed my laptop and tried to get a few hours sleep before my flight back to DC. Tried not to think about those ligature marks that looked different from every angle. Tried not to wonder how our killer kept finding witnesses hidden behind millions of dollars of federal security. Janet would figure it out. She had to. We were running out of witnesses to save. I should have seen it sooner. 3 days after sending Janet those files, I was back in DC, running what I thought was a routine security review. Just standard protocol, check the access logs, verify clearance levels, make sure nobody was poking around where they shouldn't be. The federal building's server room always smelled like hot plastic and recycled air. I sat at one of those government-issue desks that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s, clicking through endless database queries. My eyes were starting to blur from staring at green text on black screens when something caught my attention. Janet's access logs didn't add up. At first, I figured it was a glitch. The timestamp showed queries dating back 3 years, but Walsh had only assigned her to my case 3 weeks ago. I leaned closer to the monitor, squinting at the dates. November 2019, March 2020, October 2021, query after query, stretching back years before she'd supposedly started analyzing our witness murders. My coffee went cold while I dug deeper. Each query pulled specific information, witness relocations, new identities, security protocols, not just recent cases either. She'd accessed files on witnesses I'd placed 5, 6 years ago, people who'd been living quiet lives under new names in places nobody should know about. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead while I printed everything. Page after page spooled out of the ancient printer, each one making my stomach sink lower. By the time I finished, I had a stack thick as a phone book. I spread the printouts across the desk, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Janet had pulled psychological profiles on every single witness in our system. Not just basic information, deep profiles. The kind we only created for high-risk placements. Childhood traumas, personality disorders, behavioral triggers. Information that required clearance levels way above what an intelligence analyst should have. Roberto Vasquez, former cartel enforcer, extreme PTSD from childhood abuse. Placed in Portland as Robert Vaughn. Chen Wei Lin, ex-triad accountant, obsessive-compulsive tendencies. Trust issues stemming from brother's betrayal. Living in Denver as Charlie Wilson. Maria Castellano, Lucchese family bookkeeper. Anxiety disorder managed with medication. Prone to panic attacks in confined spaces. Relocated to Minneapolis as Mary Carter. Every file contained details that made my hands shake. Medical histories, family vulnerabilities, psychological pressure points, the kind of information that could destroy someone if it fell into the wrong hands, or help someone find them. I gathered up the printouts, my mind racing. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe Walsh had given her special access for the investigation. Maybe I was jumping at shadows after too many sleepless nights and too much bad coffee. But I knew better. 20 years in witness protection teaches you to trust your gut, and mine was screaming. The secure briefing room was on the 7th floor, soundproof walls, no windows, electronic locks that recorded every entry and exit. I found Janet there at 2 in the afternoon, sitting at the conference table with her laptop open, those wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the screen's glow. She looked up when I entered, and something in her expression made me close the door behind me. Not surprise, not concern, just a calm acknowledgement, like she'd been expecting this conversation. I dropped the stack of printouts on the table. They landed with a thud that seemed too loud in the quiet room. Want to explain these? I kept my voice steady, professional. Give her a chance to explain. Maybe there was a reason. Janet glanced at the papers, then back at me. She removed her glasses, cleaned them with that careful precision I'd watched a dozen times, and put them back on. You found the access logs? Not a question, a statement. 3 years, Janet. You've been pulling witness files for 3 years. Walsh said you'd been assigned to pattern analysis for 3 weeks. She closed her laptop slowly, folded her hands on the table. The same gesture she'd used when explaining the killer's methodology. Clinical, detached. Walsh didn't assign me to pattern analysis, Eric. Her voice stayed conversational, like we were discussing weather reports. I assigned myself. The air conditioning kicked on, filling the silence. I stayed standing, trying to process what she was telling me. The psychological profiles, I said. You accessed classified files, cases you had no clearance for. I had clearance. She tilted her head slightly, studying me like I was one of her data points. Just not through the channels you're familiar with. My chest felt tight. What channels? Janet stood up, walked to the wall-mounted screen. The same screen where we'd mapped connections between dead witnesses. She picked up the remote, clicked it on. A new diagram appeared. Not crime scene photos this time. Organizational charts. Government agencies I recognized, FBI, DEA, ATF, all connected by lines to a central node labeled Project Synthesis. The witness protection program has a fundamental flaw, she said, using the same tone she'd used to explain money laundering patterns. It's reactive. We hide people after they've already given us what we need. But what if we could be proactive? What if we could build comprehensive intelligence networks before crimes happen? I stared at the screen, at the connecting lines that looked too much like the red string on my office wall. What are you talking about? She clicked the remote again. Photos appeared. Robertson, Montgomery, Miles, Lewis, Nelson, but now with additional information beneath each face. Asset codes, extraction dates, intelligence yield percentages. Every witness who enters protection brings valuable intelligence, Janet continued. Financial systems, organizational hierarchies, operational methods. But it's fragmented, incomplete. They only know their small piece of the larger picture. My mouth went dry. You're not analyzing the murders. No. She turned to face me, and for the first time since I'd known her, she smiled. Small, professional, terrifying. I'm orchestrating them. The room spun slightly. I gripped the back of a chair, trying to steady myself. You killed them. Technically, I facilitated their strategic elimination. She returned to her seat, calm as ever. Each target was selected for specific intelligence value. Robertson knew the money trails. Montgomery understood Yakuza hierarchy. Miles had territorial politics. Lewis possessed digital infrastructure. Nelson knew tactical operations. I thought about Robertson's body in that Chicago living room. The precise ligature marks. The professional execution. The garrote. A useful tool. Creates a signature that suggests professional assassination without pointing to any specific organization. She adjusted her glasses. It took months to perfect the technique. The marks had to be distinctive enough to cause concern, but ambiguous enough to prevent attribution. My legs felt weak. I sank into a chair across from her. Why? Because scattered intelligence is useless intelligence. She opened her laptop again, turned it toward me. The screen showed a massive database, names and photos scrolling past too fast to read. By systematically eliminating key witnesses and extracting their complete knowledge first, we've built the most comprehensive criminal intelligence network in history. Every money trail, every hierarchy, every alliance and rivalry. Decades of insider information compiled into a single, actionable database. You tortured them. The words came out rough. Made Robertson write down every account. Forced Lewis to document his entire system. I extracted necessary intelligence. No emotion in her voice. Each subject provided their complete knowledge base before termination. The government now possesses master files on every major criminal organization in the country. We can predict their moves, prevent their operations, control their futures. I thought about Lewis at his desk, typing with a garrote around his neck. Nelson in his garage, demonstrating killing techniques while dying. These were people under my protection. They were assets. Janet's dark eyes stayed fixed on mine. Former criminals who'd outlived their usefulness to the traditional system. Their deaths serve a greater purpose. A greater purpose? My voice cracked. I trusted you, gave you everything. Witness locations, security protocols, transport schedules. Yes, she pulled up another file on her laptop. Your comprehensive access made the operation significantly more efficient. I should thank you for that. The file showed current witness placements, names, addresses, security details, everything I'd sent her that night in Phoenix. Red marks next to some entries, completed extractions. Green marks next to others, future targets. Courtney Russell's name had a green mark. So did Marvin Kim's. You're planning to kill more of them. The intelligence gathering phase requires 12 more extractions to achieve comprehensive coverage. She spoke like she was reading a grocery list, each selected for specific knowledge gaps in our database. Courtney Russell understands cartel financial structures. Marvin Kim knows triad expansion protocols. I stared at the screen, at the names of people I'd promised to protect, people who'd trusted the system, trusted me. How many agencies are involved in this? Project Synthesis operates under joint oversight from 7 federal agencies. She clicked to another screen showing approval signatures, budget allocations, operational clearances. Your Deputy Director Walsh is fully aware, though he felt it best to compartmentalize your involvement. You're too emotionally invested in individual witnesses to see the larger strategic value. 20 years. 20 years of moving families in the middle of the night, of creating new identities, of promising safety. All of it compromised by the very system I'd devoted my life to. The families, I said. The mob families. They think they're at war with each other. A useful side effect. Janet closed her laptop. Destabilization creates opportunities. While they focus on revenge, we consolidate control. Within 5 years, organized crime as we know it will cease to exist. Not through arrests or trials, but through complete intelligence dominance. She stood up, gathered her materials with the same efficient movements I'd watched for weeks. Your access privileges will be revoked within the hour. Security will escort you from the building. Your service has been appreciated, Eric, but your part in this operation is complete. I couldn't move, couldn't think past the faces on that screen. Robertson checking under his car every morning, Montgomery lining up his shoes, Miles scratching at his attacker, trying to leave evidence. They died thinking their killers were revenge seekers, old enemies settling scores. Instead, they'd been sacrificed by the very people sworn to protect them. Every safe house I gave you, I said, the words thick in my throat. Every relocation I coordinated, you used them to hunt my witnesses. Our witnesses, Janet corrected, heading for the door. And yes, your cooperation made you an invaluable asset to Project Synthesis, even if you didn't know it. She paused at the door, hand on the handle. If it helps, think of it as evolution. The witness protection program is transforming from a defensive system to an offensive one. Your witnesses aren't being murdered, Eric. They're being weaponized. The door closed behind her with a soft click. I sat in the empty briefing room, staring at the organizational chart still glowing on the wall screen, and understood with perfect clarity that every promise I'd ever made to a protected witness had been a lie. Every safe house I'd established had become a trap. Every new identity I'd created had just made them easier to find. I'd spent 20 years protecting witnesses from their enemies, never realizing the real threat was standing right beside me. She didn't just tell me about what she'd learned from those dead witnesses. Janet Young showed me, started with a blank piece of paper she pulled from her portfolio. Government issue printer paper, nothing special. She held it up to the light, studying it like a doctor checking an X-ray. Roberto Vasquez taught me this before I killed him, she said. Bratva document forger, best in the business. Watch. Her fingers moved across that paper like a concert pianist warming up. She pulled out a pen, not some fancy Mont Blanc, just a regular Bic from the conference table. Started sketching, not drawing exactly, more like sculpting with ink, building layers, creating depth where there shouldn't be any. The Russians don't just forge signatures, she said, still working. They recreate entire identities. Birth certificates, death certificates, marriage licenses. Roberto showed me how they age paper with coffee and cigarette smoke, how they match ink formulations from different decades. She slid the paper across to me. In maybe 3 minutes, she'd created what looked like a 30-year-old Social Security card. The wear patterns, the fading, even the way certain numbers looked more worn than others from repeated handling. If I hadn't watched her make it, I'd have sworn it was real. That's just paper. She leaned back in her chair, adjusting those wire-rimmed glasses. The Yakuza taught me about money, not stealing it, moving it, making it disappear. She opened her laptop, turned the screen toward me. Numbers started flowing across it. Bank accounts, shell companies, cryptocurrency wallets. Montgomery explained their washing cycles, how they move money through pachinko parlors, then real estate, then international art sales. Each step removes another layer of dirt. The screen changed. New accounts appeared. Government accounts. I've been practicing, she said. Moving budget allocations between departments. Small amounts. 10,000 here, 20 there. Nobody notices because the money stays in the system. But control where money flows and you control everything else. My throat felt dry. I'd given her access to our financial protocols 3 days ago. Our operating budgets, our safe house funding, our witness stipend accounts. The Italians, she continued, closing the laptop, they taught me the real art. Not killing, that's easy. Making someone want to die, making them beg for it. She stood up, moved to the wall where her organizational chart hung. Project Synthesis, she'd called it. All those agency connections mapped out like a subway system. Pedro Miles was particularly educational. 40 years as a Lucasian enforcer. You know what he told me while I had that garrote around his neck? He thanked me, said he'd been waiting 20 years for someone to find him, living in fear that long. It breaks you. She traced her finger along the chart, following the connections between agencies. Every crime family operates on chaos, emotional decisions, personal vendettas, territory disputes based on whose grandfather controlled what neighborhood in 1952. It's inefficient. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, that government building white noise I'd heard 1,000 times before. Now it sounded different, menacing. What I'm building, she said, turning back to me, is crime without the criminals. All the profitable enterprises, drugs, gambling, prostitution, but run with federal efficiency. No turf wars, no revenge killings, no 15-year-old kids getting shot because they wore the wrong color shirt on the wrong block. You're talking about the government becoming the mob. I'm talking about evolution. Her dark eyes stayed steady behind those glasses. We already monitor everything. We already control information flow. Why let criminals profit from enterprises we could manage better? Use those profits to fund operations Congress won't authorize. Build networks in countries where official diplomacy fails. She pulled out her phone. Standard government issue. Black case. Probably encrypted to hell and back. 12 more witnesses to process. Each one holds pieces I need. Supply chain routes, distribution networks, contact protocols. That's when I made my move. Not much of one, I'll admit. Just lunged across the conference table, trying to grab her phone, trying to grab something. Evidence, maybe. Or maybe I just wanted to wrap my hands around her throat the way she'd done to Robertson, Montgomery, Miles, Lewis, and Nelson. She stepped back, smooth as water. Let me sprawl across that table like an idiot. By the time I got my feet under me, she was already at the door. The building's in lockdown, she said. I triggered it when I walked in. Security thinks we're running an active shooter drill. Elevators are disabled. Stairwell doors lock automatically. I rushed the door. She slipped through, pulled it shut. The lock engaged with a soft click. Government buildings, all that security designed to keep threats out. Works just as well keeping people in. The phone on the conference table rang. Internal line. 17 minutes until security resets, Janet's voice said through the speaker. I need maybe 5 to finish what I came for. I grabbed a chair, smashed it against the door. Government furniture, built to last. The chair broke. The door didn't even dent. Courtney Russell, Janet continued, her voice echoing through empty hallways. Former cartel accountant. Knows every money route from Colombia to Canada. Living in Seattle now as Carol Roberts. Works at H&R Block, can you believe it? All that financial genius wasted on middle-class tax returns. Another crash. This time I used the conference table itself, flipped it against the door. The wood splintered, the door held. Marvin Kim, ex-Triad, Portland. Runs a martial arts studio for kids. He mapped out every Triad expansion plan for the next decade before he flipped. Where they'll open businesses, which politicians they'll buy, how they'll integrate with local gangs. I found the overhead projector, one of those old heavy ones nobody'd bothered to surplus, hefted it like a battering ram. The first hit cracked the door's window. Safety glass, designed not to shatter, spiderwebbed instead. You gave me their locations, Janet said. Their new names, their security protocols, just like I knew you would. Good men always want to protect people. It's what makes you so predictable. The second hit punched through the glass. I reached through, feeling for the lock mechanism, cut my hand on the safety glass. Didn't care. I'm already gone, Eric. Out of the building. This is just a recording, but you'll find what you need on your desk. 3rd floor, if you hurry. The lock clicked open. I burst into an empty hallway, fluorescent lights humming, no sign of Janet Young anywhere. Blood from my hand dripped onto government gray carpet as I ran for the stairwell. She was right about the lockdown. Stairwell doors wouldn't budge. Had to smash through another window, climb through into the 3rd floor hallway. More blood, more government gray carpet getting stained. My office door stood open. On my desk, 2 files, Courtney Russell and Marvin Kim. Their real names, their cover names, their addresses. Everything I'd sent Janet 3 days ago. Red circles drawn around their locations. Notes in her handwriting. Next acquisitions. Financial infrastructure. Russell. Expansion protocols. Kim. Post-it note stuck to my phone. They're not safe in the system. Not from me. You have 6 hours before I reach Seattle. 12 before Portland. Choose wisely. I grabbed the phone, started dialing. Not the service, not Walsh, the witnesses themselves. Direct lines we're never supposed to use except for absolute emergencies. Courtney Russell answered on the 3rd ring. Hello? Cautious. Worried. She'd kept that habit from her old life. Never trust an unexpected call. Ms. Russell, this is Deputy Marshal Eric Sims. You need to listen very carefully. 20 minutes to explain. Another 20 to convince her I wasn't the threat. That someone inside the service was coming for her. That everything she'd trusted for 3 years was compromised. What do you want me to do? Her voice stayed steady, but I could hear the fear underneath. Accountants understand risk assessment. She knew the math wasn't in her favor. Run. Get out now. Don't pack. Don't call anyone. Just go. I'll contact you in 24 hours with instructions. Where? Anywhere but where you are now. Marvin Kim took longer to convince. 40 minutes of back and forth. Ex-Triad don't trust easy. Had to tell him details about Janet, about the other murders, about how she'd learned from each victim before killing them. This woman, he said finally. She has government authority? Had. I'm burning her access now, but she knows your location, your habits, everything. Long pause. Could hear kids in the background. His afternoon martial arts class. 6-year-olds learning basic forms. Normal life he'd built over 5 years of being Thomas Park instead of Marvin Kim. I'll need resources, he said. I'm working on that. For now, just disappear. Both of you. Both? Courtney Russell, former cartel accountant. She's running too. Another pause. You're asking criminals to trust each other. I'm asking survivors to stay alive. Whatever Janet Young is building, it threatens all of us. The service, the witnesses, even the crime families. She wants to replace everything with her vision of controlled crime. Give me her number. Russell's. I hesitated. Witnesses aren't supposed to contact each other. Basic protocol. But Janet had already shredded every protocol we had. Gave him the number. Gave her his. 2 people who should never have known the other existed, now dependent on each other for survival. They called me back an hour later, conference call from burner phones they'd bought, already working together. Russell's financial expertise and Kim's strategic thinking, natural partnership born from shared threat. "We need intelligence on Young," Kim said. "Her patterns, her resources, her weaknesses. She knows everything we taught the dead witnesses," Russell added, "but she learned from us separately. What if we combine what we know, create strategies she hasn't seen?" They were right. Janet had extracted intelligence from each witness individually. Robertson's money trails, Montgomery's hierarchies, Miles's politics, Lewis's digital systems, Nelson's tactics. But she'd never seen how that knowledge could combine, how a cartel accountant and a triad operative might merge their expertise into something new. "Do it," I said. "Pool everything. Create counters for every technique she stole. I'll feed you what I can from inside." "You trust us?" Kim asked. "You're breathing. That makes you more trustworthy than anyone with a badge right now." They agreed to work together, to share intelligence, to build defenses against a threat none of us fully understood yet. Former enemies united by a simple recognition. Janet Young represented something worse than any crime family. She wanted to be all of them at once. The secure communications center was buried 3 floors underground. No windows, no cell signal, just banks of servers humming behind bulletproof glass and enough encryption hardware to make the NSA jealous. I'd tracked Janet there through the building's internal security feeds. She'd used her clearance codes one last time, probably figuring nobody was watching at 2 in the morning. She had her laptop connected directly to the main server rack when I found her. Multiple cables snaking from her machine into different ports, like some kind of digital octopus. The screens around her showed progress bars, file transfers, database migrations. Everything she'd learned from those dead witnesses, everything she'd stolen from their minds before she killed them. It was all flowing into the federal systems. "Almost done," she said without turning around. Her fingers never stopped moving across the keyboard. 3 more minutes and it's permanent. Every criminal network, every money trail, every operational method, all of it integrated into our systems forever. I moved closer, keeping my hands visible. My cut palm had mostly stopped bleeding, but dried blood still flaked off when I flexed my fingers. The room smelled like ozone and hot electronics. "You know what happens when you upload conflicting data into interconnected systems?" I asked. She actually laughed. "Please, I've spent 3 years preparing this architecture, every contingency mapped, every conflict resolved." That's when I reached for the emergency panel on the wall. Big red button under glass, the kind they put in server rooms for catastrophic failures. The label read, "Security Protocol 7 Complete System Isolation." Janet spun in her chair, but I'd already smashed the glass with my elbow and hit the button. The effect was immediate. Every screen in the room lit up with warning messages. Sirens started wailing. The servers behind their bulletproof barriers began executing emergency protocols, dumping active memory, severing external connections, backing up critical data while quarantining everything else. But Janet's upload was already in progress. Half her database had made it into the federal systems before the isolation kicked in. "You idiot," she said, turning back to her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, trying to maintain the connection. "You have no idea what you've just..." Then the cascading started. See, Janet had been meticulous about learning from each witness. Roberto's forgery techniques, Montgomery's money laundering methods, Miles's territorial strategies, Lewis's digital architecture, Nelson's tactical operations. She'd absorbed it all, categorized it, optimized it. But she'd made one mistake. She'd tried to make criminal methodologies from different organizations work together in a single system. The screens started showing the conflicts. Bratva money movement protocols clashing with Yakuza accounting methods. Italian territorial agreements contradicting triad expansion models. Every criminal organization had developed their own systems over decades, specifically designed to be incompatible with their rivals. It's what kept them from merging, from becoming one massive syndicate. And now all those incompatible systems were trying to execute simultaneously within the federal architecture. "No," Janet said, her voice small. She typed faster, trying to isolate the conflicts. "I accounted for this. I built buffers, translation protocols." But the cascade was accelerating. Each conflict triggered more conflicts. Security protocols from one system identified the others as threats. Defensive measures activated, treating the other criminal methodologies as attacks. The federal systems, designed to maintain order and hierarchy, couldn't process the fundamental chaos of competing criminal logic. I watched the progress bars on her screens reverse, files corrupting, databases fragmenting, 3 years of careful construction unraveling in minutes. Janet stood up, backed away from her laptop like it was on fire, which, judging by the smoke starting to rise from the server room, might not have been far off. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she said. Her wire-rimmed glasses reflected the cascading error messages. "I had everything planned, every variable accounted for." That's when I saw it hit her. Really hit her. She'd spent so long studying these criminal techniques, learning their methods, their patterns, their logic. She'd absorbed it all so completely that she'd started thinking like them. All of them. At once. Her hands went to her temples. "Too many voices," she whispered. "Too many ways of thinking." The Bratva part of her mind wanted to solve problems with brutal directness. The Yakuza part demanded honor and hierarchy. The Italian part schemed for territory and respect. The Triad part calculated expansion and control. And they were all her now, all trying to operate simultaneously in a single mind. I'd seen it happen to deep cover agents who stayed under too long. They forgot which personality was real. But Janet had gone further. She'd absorbed entire organizational philosophies, complete criminal worldviews. And now, with her careful digital architecture collapsing, those philosophies were turning against each other inside her own head. She dropped to her knees, pressing her palms against the cold server room floor. Can't reconcile them. They all make sense individually, but together they're chaos, I finished. She looked up at me, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I saw fear in her eyes. Not fear of getting caught or fear of failure, fear of what she'd become. The servers were in full meltdown now. Automatic fire suppression kicked in, flooding the server room with inert gas. The screens around us flickered and died one by one. Janet's laptop gave a final electronic scream and went dark. In the end, it was the chaos that got her. The same chaos she'd tried to eliminate by consolidating criminal intelligence under government control. She'd thought she could impose order on disorder, create crime without criminals. But crime is chaos. It exists because people are messy, unpredictable, contradictory. Try to systematize it, optimize it, make it efficient, and it stops being crime. It becomes something else, something worse. Janet was still on her knees when security finally broke through the isolation protocols and stormed the room. She didn't resist. I'm not sure she even noticed them. She was too busy fighting a war inside her own mind, 5 different criminal philosophies battling for control. They took her away in restraints, but the real prison was in her head. The witness protection program survived, but barely. We lost about 30% of our databases in the cascade. Had to rebuild from paper backups in some cases. Took us 18 months to fully recover, and even then, some things were gone forever. But we survived. The witnesses survived. Courtney Russell and Marvin Kim helped us rebuild, using their knowledge to strengthen our protections instead of weaponizing them. They understood something Janet never did, that protecting witnesses isn't about controlling crime. It's about giving people a second chance. I kept working witness protection for another 5 years after that. Never forgot what happened, though. Never forgot how Janet had started out trying to help, trying to find patterns, trying to protect people. She'd had access and authority and the absolute conviction that she was doing the right thing. That's what haunts me. Not the murders, not the betrayal, not even the sight of her on her knees in that server room fighting a battle she'd created inside her own mind. What haunts me is knowing that she'd started out just like me, someone who wanted to protect the innocent, who believed in justice, who thought the system could be improved if we just tried hard enough. The greatest threat to justice doesn't come from criminals. They're predictable in their own way. The greatest threat comes from those of us sworn to protect it, when we start believing we know better than the system we serve, when we think the rules don't apply because our intentions are good. Janet taught me that. Cost 5 good men their lives to learn it, but I learned it.